Welcome to English Insight, where you practice English by exploring the past. In this video, you'll improve your listening and vocabulary while discovering real stories from history. It's English learning made simple, fun, and unforgettable. Let's get started. Section 1. Early struggle with English. I still remember the first time I heard English spoken around me. It sounded fast, sharp, and completely out of reach. At school, we had English lessons, but they felt more like a formality dry textbooks, stiff grammar drills, and a teacher who spoke too quickly for anyone to follow. I'd sit at my desk, eyes glued to the board, pretending to understand. The truth was, I didn't. Not even close. The words all blurred together, and the grammar. A nightmare. Verbs changed form without warning. Prepositions didn't make sense. And don't even get me started on pronunciation. Y was through not pronounced the way it looked. I began to dread those classes. Every time the teacher asked a question in English, I'd look away, praying they wouldn't call my name. I feared humiliation. I feared the smirks, the laughter, the whispers when I stumbled over simple sentences like "How are you?" or "My name is." My head, the sentences were perfect. But when I opened my mouth, it was like a storm of nerves swallowed my words. What came out felt clumsy, broken, and full of self-doubt. The worst part wasn't even the classroom, it was outside of it. On the streets, English signs were everywhere. Menus, advertisements, street directions, even labels on food. I'd walk past them quickly, pretending to understand, hoping no one would ask me to read something out loud. Once I was in a store, and a tourist asked me for help in English. I froze. I understood what he said sort of, but the fear of saying the wrong thing kept me silent. He smiled awkwardly and moved on. I felt like I had failed, like the world had asked me a question and I couldn't answer. At home, I never practiced. No one around me spoke English fluently. And there was this unspoken idea that English was for smart people or for those who would leave the country. I didn't see myself in either of those categories, so I stayed quiet. I avoided speaking. In class, faked my way through homework and convinced myself that maybe I just wasn't cut out for languages. Some people had a knack for English, I didn't. But deep inside, something bothered me. I knew English mattered. The people who got the good jobs, who traveled, who studied abroad, they all spoke it. They moved through the world with confidence. I wanted that too, even if I couldn't admit it back then. I just didn't know where to start, or whether someone like me, shy, unsure, and constantly behind, could ever get there. Still, even in that quiet frustration, a seed was planted. I just didn't realize it yet. Section 2. Learning bit by bit, at some point. After so much frustration and self-doubt, I realized that giving up on English would mean giving up on too many possibilities. I didn't have a big plan. I didn't have a teacher holding my hand. I just knew that I needed to start somewhere, anywhere. So, I began with what I had: a second-hand English dictionary, a notebook, and an internet connection. No magic, no shortcuts, just slow, steady steps. I told myself I'd try to learn 5 new words a day. That was it. Not 50, not even 10, just 5. Some days I hit the mark, other days I didn't, but I kept coming back. It was the first time English felt like something I could manage, piece by piece. One of the first breakthroughs came from music. I had always loved pop songs, but now I started listening with new ears. I'd pick a song I liked, print out the lyrics, and underline words I didn't know. Then I'd translate them, not with a translator app at first, but by using the dictionary old-school style. It took forever. But it taught me context. I began to understand how words functioned within sentences, not just what they meant individually. When I listened again and recognized the words I'd studied, It felt like unlocking a secret. Slowly, English started sounding less like noise and more like music. TV shows were my next classroom. I picked sitcoms with simple dialogue shows, like Friends and The Big Bang Theory, and watched them with subtitles in my native language. I'd catch a word, pause, rewind, replay. Sometimes I'd mimic the characters, saying their lines out loud, practicing pronunciation. I didn't care if it sounded silly. I was alone in my room, and those actors became my first speaking partners. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was building listening comprehension, pronunciation, and vocabulary all at once. And more importantly, I was having fun. English was no longer just a subject, it was entertainment, escape, and education rolled into one. I also started using my phone differently. I changed the system language to English. At first, it was confusing. I struggled to find settings or understand notifications, but that struggle forced me to learn. Every time I figured something out, I added a new word to my vocabulary. Settings, update, storage. These weren't words I'd find in a textbook lesson, but they became part of my daily language. My phone became my flashcard deck. My life became my lesson plan. Next came reading very slowly. Children's books were my first target. I found online PDFs and read one page at a time, underlining every word I didn't understand. It was frustrating, but also empowering. Once I finished a book just 30 pages long, it felt like I had climbed a mountain. I remember proudly telling my friend I read a book in English. He laughed and said, "How long did it take?" I replied, 2 weeks. But to me, it felt like a gold medal moment. That little victory pushed me to keep going. Online forums became my secret weapon. I joined Reddit communities and small language learning groups. I didn't post much at first, just read and observed. But seeing how people expressed themselves in English, even those who weren't native speakers, gave me courage. Mistakes, their progress, their questions. I wasn't alone. Eventually, I started replying. Small comments, short answers, and when someone upvoted my reply or responded kindly, it felt like getting a high five from the world. I wasn't just learning English anymore, was using it. Language learning apps helped too. I downloaded Duolingo, Memrise, and a few flashcard apps. I didn't rely on them completely, but they gave me structure on days when I didn't know what to do. The daily streak system motivated me to stay consistent. 10 minutes a day turned into 20. I learned things like she drinks water or the cat is on the table. Basic, sure, but necessary. They gave me building blocks. And with enough blocks, I could start building sentences of my own. Speaking remained the hardest part. I could read and write a bit, but when it came to speaking, I froze. The words were there in my head, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. So, I started small. I practiced tongue twisters. I read paragraphs out loud. I repeated phrases after watching YouTube videos. I even started recording myself speaking, just to hear how I sounded. It was strange at first hearing my own voice in a different language, but it helped me hear what needed work. I focused on intonation, stress, and clarity. Bit by bit, the fear faded. I'll never forget the first time I had a full, simple conversation in English. It was with someone I met online, a guy from Indonesia who was also learning. We both struggled, laughed at mistakes, and helped each other out. We had nothing in common except one thing. We both wanted to improve. That friendship lasted for months. And through that connection, I learned slang, idioms, and how English was actually used, not just how it was taught. Another big help was journaling. I started writing daily entries in English, even if they were basic. Today, I went to the market. I feel tired because I studied a lot. Over time, these simple sentences evolved. The weather is gloomy today, but I find it peaceful. The words came more easily. The grammar slowly improved. Most importantly, I was thinking in English, even just a little. Mistakes. I made thousands. Still do. I used the wrong tenses, messed up articles, confused borrow and lend, fun and funny, do and make. I embarrassed myself more than once, but every mistake taught me something. I stopped seeing them as failures and started treating them like stepping stones. Each time I got corrected, I remembered it better. The more I learned, the more I realized how much I didn't know. That could have been discouraging, but instead, it excited me. English wasn't just a subject. It was a door to culture, humor, science, and history. I began watching documentaries, reading blogs, listening to podcasts. I followed native speakers. On social media, copied their phrases, and picked up on how English changes depending on context, formal, casual slang. Language stopped being static. It became alive. Bit by bit, brick by brick, I was building something. Not just vocabulary, not just grammar, but confidence. The fear that once ruled me started to fade. I still had a long way to go, but I wasn't frozen anymore. I was moving, slowly, steadily. Every word I learned gave me a little more power, a little more voice. And looking back, I realized that it wasn't a dramatic turning point that changed everything. It was the small, consistent actions, the notebook full of scribbled translations, the songs on repeat, the subtitles, the late-night practice sessions. Each one seemed minor at the time, but together, they created momentum. That's how I learned English, not in one big leap, but in hundreds of tiny steps, taken one day at a time. Section 3. First success. There's a moment every learner remembers: the first real success. The first time you use the language in the real world and it actually works. For me, it wasn't anything grand. It wasn't a speech or an essay. It was just a few simple words exchanged with a stranger online, but it meant the world to me. Up to that point, I'd been studying in private, practicing in silence, building vocabulary like stacking bricks with no idea what I was building. But this was different. This was real. My English didn't just live in books or apps anymore. It was alive. It happened during an online game. I was playing late one night, headphones on, focused, when suddenly, a teammate with an American accent asked, "Can someone cover me?" I froze. I understood what he said. That alone was shocking. It wasn't a word-for-word understanding, I just knew what he meant. Without thinking, I typed, "I got you." 2 seconds later, he replied, "Thanks, man." That tiny, casual exchange felt like fireworks in my brain. I had communicated. I had understood, responded, and been understood. For the first time. English wasn't something I was struggling to learn, it was something I had used. From that moment, my confidence changed. It was like someone flipped a switch. I didn't magically become fluent overnight, but I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could become fluent someday. That belief is powerful. Before that, I thought English belonged to other people, native speakers, top students, rich, kids who went to language academies. After that moment, I realized English could belong to me too, so I leaned into it. I started joining online communities where English was the main language. At first, I just read. I scrolled through comments, tried to make sense of jokes, picked up new phrases like on point or low key, or take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes I didn't understand, but I would look things up. Bit by bit, I started commenting too. Not long paragraphs, just simple responses like "I agree," or "That's funny," or "Same here." And people replied. They didn't mock my grammar. They didn't say, "Your English is bad." They just talked to me like I was anyone else. That was success number 2. Being part of a conversation, even a small one. Then came something bigger. A foreign tourist came to the shop where I was working part-time. He was lost, looking for a nearby hotel, and asked for directions in English. My coworker backed away and said, "You speak a little English, right?" I nodded, nervous. I listened carefully and replied with what I hoped was a clear explanation. "You go straight, then turn left at the bank. The hotel is next to the coffee shop." He smiled and said, "Great. Thanks a lot." And just like that, it was over. A full conversation in public with a real person. I didn't mess up. I didn't freeze. I didn't need to look anything up. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. That was the moment I knew things had changed. I wasn't just learning English anymore, was living in it. I started to use English in places where I'd never dared to before. I changed my social media bios. I wrote captions in English. I began thinking in English, at least some of the time. I even tried writing short posts, like diary entries or thoughts of the day. Sometimes people corrected me in the comments, but it didn't bother me. In fact, I was grateful. Every correction was a lesson. Every mistake was progress. I remember one post I wrote about a movie I had watched. "This movie gave me strong feeling. 'Tis so deep, and I want to see it again." Someone replied kindly, "Do you mean this movie gave me strong feelings?" It was so deep, and I want to see it again. I smiled. They were right. I wrote it down, thanked them, and kept going. That moment wasn't discouraging, it was motivating. It proved that people were willing to help if I was willing to. I even started watching videos made for English learners. There were YouTubers who explained grammar with energy and clarity, who broke down difficult topics into small, funny lessons. I followed them, practiced with their exercises, repeated their sentences. One said something that stuck with me. Fluency doesn't mean perfection. It means confidence. That idea shifted something in me. I realized I didn't need to wait until my English was perfect to start using it. I just needed to start, so I began recording myself speaking. I'd choose a topic: my favorite food, my weekend plans, a book I was reading, and talk for 2 minutes straight. At first, I hated hearing my voice. My accent felt strong. My grammar was shaky. But over time, I noticed improvements. I hesitated. Less I corrected myself mid-sentence, I sounded more natural. These recordings became a private journal of progress. Whenever I felt stuck, I'd listen to the early ones and smile. I have come a long way. Another breakthrough came during an online language exchange. I matched with a girl from Brazil who was also learning English. We agreed to speak in English for half the time, then her native language the other half. At first, our conversations were awkward, full of pauses and wait. How do you say? But we laughed, learned together, and grew more fluent. We spoke weekly for months, and through her, I learned idioms, slang, even cultural expressions. One time, I said, "I feel blue," and she replied, "Same. Mondays are the worst." It was a small moment, but it showed me I was using English to connect emotionally, not just functionally. Bit by bit, my fear of English melted away. I realized it wasn't a monster to be tamed, was a tool, a bridge, a key to the wider world. I still had a lot to learn, of course, but I had reached a turning point. I had succeeded in using English to live, to connect, to express myself. I remember the day someone messaged me saying, "Wow, your English is really good. Are you a native speaker?" I laughed out loud. "Not even close," I replied. But I was proud. Not because someone thought I was native, but because my English was good enough that they couldn't tell. That was a milestone I never imagined I'd reach. These successes, no matter how small, added up. They gave me confidence. They pushed me to aim higher. I wasn't just learning English to pass a test or meet a requirement. I was learning it to grow, to expand my world, to discover who I could be. And that made all the difference. Section 4. Big challenge moment. Success is a great feeling, but it doesn't erase fear. In fact, the more I improved my English, the more I realized how far I still had to go. That's the strange thing about learning. You climb a mountain, and just as you're catching your breath, you see there's another one even taller waiting for you. My big challenge moment came when I decided to apply for an international scholarship that required a video interview entirely in English. The opportunity was amazing: travel abroad, meet students from around the world, and take classes in a different country. But the thought of doing an interview in English is terrifying. At first, I hesitated, opened the application link several times, and then closed it. I wrote my answers to the essay questions, but never clicked submit. I kept imagining the worst. What if they ask me something I don't understand? What if I freeze? What if I say something completely wrong and embarrass myself? The self-doubt came back hard. The same fear I had in my early days of learning English resurfaced, but this time it felt even heavier. Now there was something real at stake. But deep down, I knew I had to try. I reminded myself of all the small successes I'd already had. The online conversations, the tourist interaction, the videos I'd recorded. They had prepared me for this. So I made a plan. I started preparing every day for 2 weeks. I looked up common interview questions in English. Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want this opportunity? I practiced them aloud, over and over. I recorded myself and listened for mistakes. I rewrote my answers until they flowed more naturally. I asked a friend who is better at English to help me refine my pronunciation, but even with all that preparation, I still felt nervous on the day of the interview. My heart was racing. I had a glass of water next to me, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly spilled it. When the interviewer appeared on the screen, smiling and speaking in clear, crisp English, I smiled back, but my mind was a blur. She started with an easy question. How are you today? I am fine. I am fine. Thank you. And you? It was such a textbook answer that I almost laughed at myself, but it got me going. The next few minutes went smoothly, till the question that caught me off guard. Can you describe a time when you faced a significant challenge and how you overcame it? I froze. I understood the question, but suddenly my thoughts disappeared. I knew I had a story to tell, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched. The interviewer waited patiently. I swallowed hard and said, "I'm sorry. Can I think for a moment?" She nodded kindly. That small gesture gave me space to breathe. Then, slowly, I began to speak. Yes, I want to talk about when I started learning English. At first, it was difficult. I was afraid. I thought I would never be good at it, but I kept practicing. Every day, I made mistakes, but I learned. Now, I am here, doing this interview in English. That is my big challenge. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't polished, but it was true. I finished my answer and waited, heart pounding. The interviewer smiled and said, "Thank you for sharing that. That's very inspiring." I almost couldn't believe it. I had expected to fail, to fall apart under pressure. But instead, I had been understood. My message came through. And that was the moment I realized something powerful. You don't need to speak perfect English to make an impact. You just need to be honest, prepared, and brave enough to keep going. After the interview, I didn't know what to expect. Part of me still thought I'd blown it. I replayed my answers in my head, cringing at every small mistake. But a week later, I received an email. I had been accepted. I read the message 3 times before it sank in. I jumped up from my chair, shouting, "I did it!" I had faced one of the hardest moments of my learning journey, and I had made it through. That challenge taught me more than any textbook ever could. It taught me how to stay calm under pressure, how to communicate under stress, how to trust my preparation. I learned that English isn't just about grammar or vocabulary, it's about courage, about showing up, speaking up, and letting your voice be heard, even when it's shaky. In the weeks leading up to the program, I doubled down on preparation. I read articles about the host country, watched videos from past scholarship recipients, and continued practicing spoken English every day. I found mock interview partners online, author applicants, or English learners, and we'd do pretend interviews on Zoom, correcting each other, giving feedback. That community support made a huge difference. I wasn't doing it alone. And then came the day I traveled abroad for the first time. At the airport, everything was in English: announcements, signs, staff communication. Normally, that would have overwhelmed me, but now I felt ready. I checked in, answered security questions, and found my gate without panic. When a fellow traveler asked me where I was headed, I smiled and replied, "I'm going to study. I just got a scholarship." Saying it out loud in English made it feel even more real. Once I arrived at the program, the real challenge began: full immersion. All classes, conversations, and activities were in English. It was exhausting. My brain felt like it was lifting weights every hour, but I managed. I took notes, asked questions, joined discussions. I even gave a short speech during a group project. Every day was a challenge, but every day I showed up one night after a full day of classes. I found myself sitting with a group of international people from Italy, Kenya, Vietnam, and Sweden. We were all speaking English, sharing stories, laughing at each other's jokes. And I realized English wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a bridge. I was part of something bigger than myself. That big challenge moment, the interview, had opened the door to all of this. It had forced me to confront my fears and trust my skills. And the truth is, there will always be new challenges. Presentations, emails, debates, public speaking. But after getting through that interview, I know I can face them. I know I'm capable. So if you're reading this or listening to this and you're afraid of using English in a high-pressure situation, I want you to know something. Fear is normal. It doesn't mean you're not ready. It means you care. But don't let fear stop you. Prepare, practice, and then show up anyway. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present. That interview didn't just test my English. It revealed my growth. It marked the moment when I went from learning English to living in English, from surviving in conversations to contributing meaningfully. It was the hardest moment of my journey, but it was also the most important. Section 5. Real breakthrough. If I had to point to one moment and say, that's when everything changed, it would be the day I gave a presentation entirely in English to a live audience and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not only did I speak with clarity and confidence, I enjoyed it. That moment marked my true breakthrough. After years of studying, failing, learning, and trying again, something clicked. English wasn't something outside me anymore. It was, part of me. The event was a university seminar. I had been chosen to present a topic I was passionate about: climate change and its effects on rural communities. When I found out I'd be presenting in English, my first reaction was panic. But then another feeling came up: excitement. I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to see how far I'd come. I'd done interviews. I'd held conversations. Standing up, speaking in front of 50 people, and delivering ideas clearly in a second language. That was another level. I prepared for weeks. I wrote and rewrote my script, then practiced without reading. I recorded myself and watched with a critical eye. I noticed where I spoke too fast, where I mumbled, where I lost energy. I corrected. My body language worked on my rhythm and learned how to pause for effect. I rehearsed in front of friends and asked for feedback. I even practiced in front of the mirror, imagining the crowd, the lights, the moment, the night before the presentation. I could barely sleep. I wasn't worried about forgetting the words. I was worried about failing to connect. Would they understand me? Would I freeze under pressure? Would I mispronounce a key word? The fears circled in my head like birds. But I reminded myself, I had worked hard. I was ready. This was not just about English, it was about owning my voice. When I stepped up to the microphone, the room went quiet. I took a deep breath, looked around, and began. Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to talk about a crisis that touches all of us, whether we know it or not. As I continued, I saw heads nodding. I saw people leaning forward. I saw interest. In their eyes, that gave me energy. I didn't read from my notes. I spoke. I told a story. I explained facts. I used examples. I even made a joke and people laughed. The presentation lasted 10 minutes. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. One professor said, "Your English was excellent, but more than that, your message was powerful." That sentence stayed with me. It wasn't about grammar anymore. It wasn't about impressing people with vocabulary. It was about communicating something meaningful. Afterward, a classmate asked me, "Did you memorize all that?" I smiled. No, I practiced it, but I spoke from the heart. That was the difference. I was no longer hiding behind rehearsed lines. I was expressing myself in English as comfortably as I would in my own language. That breakthrough had nothing to do with perfection. In fact, I made small errors, used the wrong preposition once, stumbled over a word, but no one cared. The audience didn't notice because they were too focused on the message. And I realized something that day. Fluency is not about sounding like a native speaker. It's about being understood, being confident, and being yourself in a second language. After that, everything changed. I started volunteering to lead group discussions. I said yes to new opportunities instead of backing away. I began to think in English more naturally. It became less about translation and more about instinct. I stopped mentally converting every sentence from my language to English. The words came directly. I noticed it in small ways, too. When I was alone, I'd speak to myself in English. When I got excited, my thoughts formed in English. When I read an article or watched a movie, I understood the humor, the sarcasm, the tone. I had crossed a threshold, not just linguistically, but mentally. I believed in my ability. I no longer feared English. I trusted it. Even writing became enjoyable. I started a blog where I shared my experiences learning English, and to my surprise, people read it. Some left comments saying, "Thank you for this, inspires me to keep learning." That was one of the most meaningful responses I ever got. I wasn't just learning anymore, was helping others learn. My teachers noticed the change. They said, "You've grown a lot." What happened? Kai just said, I stopped being afraid to make mistakes. That's what the breakthrough gave me, freedom. I wasn't chasing perfect grammar or a perfect accent. I was aiming for clarity, connection, confidence. It was like learning to ride a bike. At first, it was wobbly and scary. Then it became smoother. And one day, I wasn't even thinking about the mechanics, I was just enjoying the ride. That's what English became for me. Something I could ride into new ideas, relationships, opportunities. If you're still waiting for your breakthrough, I want to tell you this. It's coming. It won't arrive like lightning. It builds over time. But when it hits, you'll know. It feels like breathing underwater and suddenly realizing you've grown gills. It feels like standing on a hill and seeing just how far you've climbed. And once you experience that feeling, you'll never forget it. Section 6. Opportunities opened after my breakthrough. It was like someone had unlocked a door to a world I didn't even know existed. English wasn't just a subject anymore, it was a passport, a bridge, a toolkit for building a better future. The more fluent I became, the more opportunities appeared. And not just in school, but in work, travel, and personal growth. It felt like I had leveled up in life, and I was finally ready to explore what was out there. The first big opportunity came when I got accepted into a short-term international program. It was a cultural exchange with students from over 15 countries. The common language, English. Without it, I never would have qualified. During the trip, I met people from Korea, Mexico, Italy, Egypt, and more. Our accents were different, our grammar was sometimes flawed, but we understood each other, and that was powerful. We laughed, learned, and bonded. We shared our dreams, fears, and stories. And all of it happened through English. That trip changed everything. It gave me international friends I still talk to today. We send voice notes, share memes, and help each other with language learning. And it was during one of those late-night conversations, when we were talking about our goals, that someone said, "You should apply for that internship abroad. Your English is good enough." I almost said no, but their belief gave me the push I needed. I applied and I got in. I became a remote intern for an international NGO that focused on education and youth empowerment. My tasks included writing reports, attending Zoom meetings, and responding to emails all in English. At first, I was nervous. What if I misunderstood an instruction? What if I sounded unprofessional? But again, I reminded myself, I don't have to be perfect. I just have to communicate. And I did. Week after week, I got better. I contributed ideas. I edited documents. I even led a small workshop on digital tools for students. English was no longer a barrier, was the very thing that made these experiences possible, and the opportunities kept coming. I began taking online courses from universities in other countries free and open, thanks to platforms like Coursera and edX. I studied leadership, sustainability, and communicational in English. I earned certificates that added weight to my resume. Suddenly, I was competing for jobs and scholarships at an international level, and I had the language skills. To back it up, even in daily life, English changed my world. I could understand news from around the globe, read research articles, watch documentaries without subtitles. I didn't feel cut off anymore. I was plugged into the wider world. I knew what was happening in other countries. I could think critically about global issues, not just local ones. That perspective made me more informed, more thoughtful, more capable. I also started mentoring younger students in my community. They'd ask, "How did you learn English?" And I'd tell them, one word at a time, one mistake at a time, one risk at a time. Some of them started learning too, inspired by the doors English had opened for me. It felt amazing to give back. Then came another milestone, a job offer. A company looking for bilingual support staff contacted me through a networking site. The recruiter said, "Your English communication is strong, and we need someone like you." I went through the interview process and was hired. The job paid well and gave me flexibility, and it all started because of English. But beyond the job titles, the friendships, the certificates, there was something even more valuable: freedom. English gave me the freedom to dream bigger, to think about studying abroad, to apply to programs I never would have dared to look at before, to ask questions in global forums, to collaborate with people I'd never meet otherwise. It gave me mobility, not just physical, but mental, emotional, professional. I've now spoken on international panels, shared my story on global platforms, and co-authored small research papers, all because I had the tools to communicate across cultures. And the truth is, none of this would have happened without those years of hard work, struggle, and persistence. Every new word I learned planted a seed. Now I'm living in the forest that grew from it. If you had told me years ago that English would be the thing that changed my life, I might have laughed. I thought it was just a subject, but it's more than that. It's a skill, a mindset, a doorway. And it's not limited to just academic or career success. It changed the way I see the world and the way the world sees me. So yes, learning English opened opportunities, but more importantly, it opened me. And that has made all the difference. Section 7. Learning Tips plus Common Expressions. If you're still on the path, wondering how to get better at English or feeling stuck somewhere along the way, just know that you're not alone and you're not doing it wrong. The key isn't perfection. It's showing up every day. Even if it's just 15 minutes, make English part of your world. Watch a movie you love. Listen to songs you already enjoy. Talk out loud to yourself while walking to school or making coffee. Don't worry about sounding strange. This is your practice space, and mistakes. They're not failures. They're signs that you're actually trying. Every sentence you fumble through, every phrase you mispronounce, every awkward conversation you survive, that's real progress. Start thinking in English, even in small ways, like writing your grocery list or describing your day to yourself. Let the language live inside your routine. Instead of memorizing individual words, start listening for natural phrases people use things. Like "I didn't catch that," or "that makes sense," or "what's the word for?" These are the building blocks of real-world communication, and they'll help you sound more confident, more fluid, more like yourself, just in a new language. And when you feel nervous, when your mind blanks, or you worry someone might judge, you remember the one phrase that always helped me? "Sorry, I'm still learning." It's honest, it's humble, and it opens the door to kindness. People don't expect perfection. They just want to connect. So keep going. Make mistakes. Speak anyway. Read, listen, laugh, and repeat. With every day you keep at it, you're not just learning English, you're becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone more connected to the world. You've already started. You're already on the path. Now, all you have to do is keep walking.